Hello, friends, and welcome back to Malicious Compliance Stories. It's rarely a good idea to spend your money helping someone save their house from eviction because the underlying issues, overspending, underemployment, addiction, etc., that cause them to be so far behind on the payments aren't solved. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with the turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. Refused to save my mother's house that my dad and stepmom kicked me out of. My dad, stepmom, stepbrother, and I were living in the house my mother originally owned. I moved out after my stepbrother took the box that had all of his mother's jewelry out of his mother's closet and concealed it inside my closet. I had no idea about it till my stepmom walked into my room and asked me one more time if I still insisted on not letting my stepbrother share the car my dad gave me. I said no, and she said, "Okay then," casually walked to my closet, opened it, pulled out her jewelry box, and started yelling. I freaked out, asking what was going on. Dad came into the room and she started crying, claiming I stole her entire jewelry box and was planning to sell it. I was stunned. I swore on my deceased mother I didn't steal anything, yet my dad didn't believe me. My stepmom demanded I get out of the house, and I had to leave because of the pressure. My stepbrother admitted putting the box inside my closet and bragged about it. I lived with my uncle for 7 years. I missed my room, backyard, and my mother's memories in that house. My stepbrother took over everything. My dad didn't attempt to connect for years and kept calling me thief until recently when I visited my uncle's and he happened to be there. He looked thin and exhausted. He said he found out my stepmom set me up and apologized for not believing me then. He said he forgave her and hoped I'd forgive him because he won't forgive himself if I don't. He then talked about having debts and needing money to pay off debts or he'd lose the house and asked to borrow money from me. I got quiet, then I asked, why can't they sell the jewelry they accused me of stealing? The car he took back. Heck, where's my stepbrother when they need him? My dad shook his head and asked if my mom would want for me to see him homeless with no help or worse, see the house she built with her memories there go to waste. I said I won't pay after they kicked me out of my mother's house because stepmom didn't want me there. You must be wondering where my stepbrother is now. He's in jail. He moved to another town, became a police officer for 4 years, conned widowed women out of their money and houses, robbed them blind, and took possession of their legal documents and falsified them to his own benefit. So he didn't enjoy his ill-gotten gains for long. My dad and uncle agreed that by paying, I'm saving my mother's house, but it's no longer her house after my stepmom turned it into a shrine for her son, who she calls a hero, and used my room as storage for his things. When I walked in for the first time after years, I felt nothing. The connection's no longer there. I still refused to pay, and we had an argument, then I left. My uncle's saying I'm making a mistake by thinking irrationally and in a spiteful manner, and should consider that my dad and stepmom are helpless, sick, and need help. And our second story. Malicious honesty when answering Border Patrol questions. Note, in the U.S., you have Border Patrol checkpoints dozens of miles from the border. In one case, in New Mexico, there's a border control checkpoint some 50 miles from the border on a military base in the absolute most barren desert ever on a bombing range. No one's sneaking around there, guys. Go home. I had to deal with these a lot when I drove around the Southwest for work. I finally had enough and decided to be as precise in my answers as humanly possible. I sought to disrupt through compliance. Scene. Waiting in line, I turned my cell phone video camera on to record what was to come next. I was 6-ish hours into a 9-hour drive at the start of a long week of work. I was driving a standard contractor work van with all my gear and so forth in it. I was about the third vehicle in line for a Border Patrol checkpoint near Alamogordo, New Mexico. Officer No Humor. U.S. citizen? Me. I'm sorry? Are you a U.S. citizen? Yes, I was born a U.S. citizen in hometown. Okay, is there anyone in the vehicle with you? Me. Not that I know of. Not that you know of? Well, I mean, there wasn't this morning when I loaded stuff up, but I haven't looked since then. Where are you coming from? Oh, I'm coming from Phoenix, Arizona. I work for continued trail of unnecessary information. Have you stopped since Phoenix? Yes. Where and why? Well, I stopped in Tucson for breakfast because there's this great taco place with great cream sauce. If you like breakfast tacos. Anywhere else? I stopped for gas in Las Cruces. They usually have better gas prices than Arizona, and my boss really likes when I... And you didn't look in the back of the van either of those times? Well, no, why would I? Do you look in your trunk when you stop to take a leak? At this point, what's typically a 5-second interaction where they look for suspicious vehicles, i.e. brown people, has taken upwards of 3 minutes. It's a 1-lane checkpoint. I'm blocking all traffic. Do you mind if I look in the back of your vehicle? Well, it's not my vehicle. It's not your vehicle? No, it's my boss name. I mean, really, it's company name. Boss name's great to work for. He used to... Cuts me off. May I look in the back of this vehicle? I'm not sure I'm comfortable making that decision for my boss. I can call him if you want, but it's his vehicle, really. No, so I can't look in the back of the vehicle? I mean, I wish I just can't make that decision for someone else's property. Stay here, said as he turns around and starts talking to his radio. Sure thing. Where would I go? Just trying to help. The officer physically cringes. At this point, another officer with a drug dog comes over, and the handler makes a loop around my van. I may have slightly rolled onto the accelerator with the van in park. This was in like August. It was hot out. They obviously find nothing. What's the dog for? The dog's sniffing for drugs. Why would there be drugs in my van? You should leave now. So I'm free to go? Yes. Oh, great. Thanks for all your hard work, and remember to stay hydrated. As I drove off, I could see him just shaking his head. It was immensely entertaining. In my mirrors, I could see quite a long line of cars that had accumulated behind me. To be fair to the Border Patrol agent, your answers to his questions would naturally evoke suspicion. Not that his curtness was justified, but I can see why he'd be frustrated. And our last story. HOA doesn't like our hardwood floor. My wife and I bought a second-floor condo a little over a year ago. We were told the HOA was pretty hands-off, and surprisingly, that actually seemed to be the case for the first year. The only thing they seemed to be interested in was keeping the grounds appealing and taking care of the common areas. We actually felt comfortable being complacent about the HOA happenings, which made our lives easier. Being a frequent lurker here, I was quite happy feeling like I lucked out on that front. Sadly, the honeymoon period was not meant to last. Almost exactly 1 year after we bought our condo, we received a violation notice for having hardwood floors in a second-floor unit. We were confused as there was no documentation provided at closing that indicated that hardwood floors were forbidden in second-floor units. More confusing was the evidence supplied were the pictures from the listing from when we bought it, which means the board sat on their evidence for at least a year. There was some back and forth with the management company in which the following main points were established. An executive resolution was passed a few years ago stating that second-floor units could not have hard floors outside of certain areas. Our hardwood floors significantly predated the resolution, like by at least a decade. This info was actually from the same listing site that they pulled their photo evidence from, which they would have known had they read anything on that page. The HOA didn't care that our floors predated the resolution as there was no grandfather clause. We requested a meeting with the board as we were not notified of this rule before closing on the condo. At this point, we brought in my dad. My dad is technically not a licensed attorney, but he's an incredibly knowledgeable lawyer. Since the board didn't know the first part, we figured this would be a pretty solid power move. Yes, let me introduce my dad. Well, yes, he is a lawyer. He'll be speaking for us at this meeting. He did make clear to us that if the issue were to find its way to an actual court, we would most likely be legally required to replace the floors. However, he was also certain that an actual court would allow us to replace the floors when we move out, rather than having to replace them 1 year after purchasing the unit. We were targeting this as we would get to enjoy our nicer floors and would have time to save up for the major expense. With this understanding, we presented our case to the HOA board. We even extended an olive branch in that we offered to buy an extra area rug or two to help dampen the noise in the higher traffic areas. The meeting, however, appeared to be inconclusive. One board member was adamantly opposed to us keeping our hardwood floors at all, one was staunchly supporting us, and the other three gave no indication of where they stood. The property manager pointed out that he definitely sent all the HOA documents to the previous owner to forward to us at closing, and made a reasonable point that of course she would not have forwarded the resolution about the hardwood floors. At that point, we figured we might have a fraud case against the previous owner, so we asked for the original email the property manager sent. We never did receive that original email, even after I followed up twice. Instead, about a week after that informal hearing, we received written confirmation that our unit was officially grandfathered in and that nothing needed to be done about the hardwood until it reached the end of its functional life. We were thrilled since this was the absolute best-case scenario for us and technically more than we were asking for at the meeting. It did seem odd that the inconclusive hearing resulted in such a definitive outcome, but we figured they must have found something while trying to dig up that email I was asking for. When we notified my dad of the good news, however, he suspected something else may have been the cause. You see, while the staunch supporter and staunch detractor were bickering at the meeting, my dad noticed that two of the other board members were talking in somewhat hushed tones. Specifically, one asked the other something to the effect of, "Weren't you the seller's rep for that unit?" My dad hadn't mentioned this before since his focus was primarily on the main conversation. Thinking back to it, though, he said that if the seller's representative had failed to disclose the flooring rule despite sitting on the executive board of the HOA in charge of said unit, she could be easily hit up with massive fines along with losing her license. Oops. On the one hand, I'm fairly certain that if I looked this particular gift horse in the mouth, I would lose my grandfather status on my floors, never mind the wrath of a vengeful HOA executive board. On the other hand, it's rather alarming that the only reason I wasn't forced to spend thousands of dollars to decrease the value of my home by thousands of dollars is that one of the board members may have been trying to protect herself from blatant fraud or malpractice. Needless to say, I'm keeping a much closer eye on the HOA board now. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.